Okay, and we're live. Welcome everybody to episode 20 of the Scholar Gypsies. Delighted today to have John Waters on with me. I did an interview with John there about, maybe it's a month ago, but there was a problem with the recording on my end. So I'm delighted to get him back. I just to talk about the migration issues that we were talking about the first on our last discussion, but also to frame in the recent Biden visit to Ireland. And I suppose one of the things, and maybe as a first question is, I went out, I've kind of started buying the paper again, and just because I do find it less triggering to buy it and I can put it down. But all of the commentary, John, of the week has been nothing but positive. Just to give a headline, tactful Biden shows his political nous on bridge building northern leg of Irish visit. And then Biden has proven himself to be a champion of peace. And everything to do with this visit has been a coronation of sorts. Even the slip, the moment when he said black and tans instead of the All Blacks, when he was making some comparison comment, the journalist class were out on all social media, apologizing and correcting it for him. There was no question. It's another example of his compos mentis. The slide and in his mental faculties that I think are well established at this stage. But I thought the pivotal thing when I looked at it as to where Ireland fits into what's going on in the world, obviously we're some sort of kind of almost 51st state of the United States, or a sleeper state that has access to the European markets for the United States in some way. And we've all these weird global influences now from Europe, from the States. And I thought it was best illustrated by the picture that was shared by some journalist of Michael D. Higgins in the Oris when Joe Biden was there, and there was the American flag, there was the Irish flag, and in the middle it was the Ukrainian flag. So it was like a very much non-neutral statement from one of our president, basically. And I suppose the question is, how do we frame this Biden visit in real terms? Because we certainly are not getting this from our newspapers.
Well, no, you have a better stomach than I have, Gerry, to be reading that stuff, But I picked up as much as I needed to pick up about it. And I mean, obviously, it's profoundly shameful and embarrassing at every level. Yet again, we say, if it were worth saying, that the journalistic profession is now dead as a dodo, and embarrassing and is not in it, and shameful is hardly in it. They have no shame. You do wonder sometimes if they even believe what they're writing. I think they know what they're asked for, what they're expected to deliver, and they deliver it somewhat with tongue in cheek. I hope for their sake that that's true, that they don't really sincerely believe this, because everything they're implying about all of this, it denies all the facts of the Biden crime family and its corruption. It's been on the take for years, selling Joe Biden's vice presidency under Obama. That became a product which the Biden family sold out, hoard out, and pimped out. And Hunter Biden, his son and pimp, was with him bizarrely in this visit. Now, I wrote something myself about it, very short, to kind of just simply note that this was going on in this island of lies and so on. But a friend of mine in America got in touch with me and said, I read, she read this, and she said, no, you're missing the point. This was not Joe Biden. Joe Biden, I know Joe Biden. I knew him for years. This is not Joe Biden. Who knows where Joe Biden is? But this is not him. And I think that's the real truth of this. And when you actually think about a number of facts about the visit, you say, well, his wife, Jill, who in the very beginning of the presidency was almost his nursemaid. She has disappeared now. And in her place is the only member of the family, Hunter, who is the guy with most to lose if this all comes down. He desperately needs this not to come down. And that's why he was there. So I think, but you see, the Irish people know nothing of this. The poor people of Ballina, they know nothing, less than nothing of this. They're delirious with joy. It's like JFK has come again. Of course, it's nothing like JFK. As we may get a chance to go into, like the Democratic Party of the United States is so far removed from what it was then that it is not even remotely the same entity.
Yeah.
And for the last 5 years, we've seen the Democratic Party in its true colors. Leaving aside what went on during the Obama presidency, which is its own voluminous litany of outrage. But to look at what happened once it became clear that what happened in 2016 in the election had happened. Look at what they did then afterwards. And I'd like to go into this in the context of the immigration thing in a while, but because it is all connected. That they basically declared war on close on a half of the American population. The working people of America, what used to be called the blue collar workers of America, who used to be the base, the electoral base of the Democratic Party. And now they're not. Nor are they the base of the Republican Party. They're the base of Donald Trump. And that, above all other things, is the reason why Trump was so objectionable to the American elites, the Democratic Party, the deep state, etc. It wasn't his personality. It wasn't his crudeness. It wasn't his tweets. It was the fact that he had awoken the sleeping giant, which had been all but marginalized. So I'd like to come back on that. But we're now up to the last year with Biden. I mean, let's just mention in passing that they stole Biden. The election was stolen on behalf of Biden. Biden was probably unaware. I don't know. Was he at the time aware of anything? The election was stolen. There's no question about it. Like, let's not even waste time debating it. It's clear. And the whole thing was suppressed. The media and
but just on that point, on the election, because these are the things that people they go, they go back. But The Economist laid out how 2 weeks after the election, or two weeks after the inauguration, The Economist magazine laid out how they stole it.
Yes.
Through the mail-in voting system. Like one of the things personally I have about that election, because I went down the rabbit hole covering that, and that's when Hunter Biden came on my scene, and you just reminded me there he's out shaking hands in Ireland.
Yes.
And like some visiting royal, and I'm thinking, on what planet would?
Yes, but actually, you think about that, Gerry. What that means is he's there as the sole representative of the Biden family on that trip, because the guy purporting to be Joe Biden is an actor playing Joe Biden. The man that was in Ballina is not Joe Biden. And it's very important for people to understand this, that they're in the middle of the greatest con, the greatest hoax in history, which is ongoing in all kinds of, it has many dimensions. The Ukraine dimension, the COVID dimension, and so on. Many dimensions. But it is all related to what is going on. Fundamentally, it's about money and economics. And it's very much an American thing, although there are British elements as well and European elements. But it's about the West. It's about really a slow motion coup that has been in progress against the West, you could say, for decades. But I think insofar as, for all intents and purposes, what we're concerned with here, it's the past decade. And certainly in Ireland since 2011, as I explained in the last time I was talking to you, that there was in effect a silent coup, an autogolpe, an auto coup, which happened in 2011, in which the conditions were put in place to replicate what's been happening in America, which is that the incumbent government, which is favorable to America, to the United States of America, will remain in office ad infinitum. And the basic arrangement out of that has been now that it will be a coalition of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. Now, Sinn Féin may, I won't rule out the possibility that Sinn Féin may be allowed to have their turn, because they're indistinguishable in every respect from the other two, except that they have a more recent history of viciousness and murder. So we're kind of skirting around here, but fundamentally this is all about the fact that America has colonized Ireland, and Ireland now, in many respects, has all the bad stuff out of America, but it doesn't have a Trump and it doesn't have guns.
Yeah, true. And if the guns do, like we'll get into this in a bit, but specifically on the migration element, we've seen, I suppose, if you're like us who have been following, basically an open borders policy on the southern border of the United States with Mexico, the volumes of people that have come in there over the last 2 years, we can see that our attitude and the way we discuss migration now is discussed in exactly the same terminology and labels as they've discussed it in the United States maybe 2 years ago, and this kind of things. The labels, the noticeable thing for me is we've suddenly adopted the labels from 3 or 4 years ago through the Trump, the Democrat Republican fight on all the issues we're fighting now was going on in America 3-4 years ago. Now there's been a pushback, we'll say, on the trans stuff big time in America that we seem to not have learned from, but have just decided, well, we'll start in 2016 where they were, and we'll push it forward. But this is what I can't really get my head around, is how we've managed to just take these labels. And Ireland's such a small country, we know these labels are false, yet I hear county councillors using them now. And and even 6 months ago, I'd have said, you're not going to fool the Irish people by calling them fascists, calling your next door neighbor a fascist or a right wing or this. But yet, I do, I'm seeing local people of authority at local levels, like even Joe Brolly, who's smart, and a lot of our intellectual, when you might call intelligent classes.
Come on, Gerry.
Well,
hold on.
What I would say on them is the likes of Joe Brolly and we'll say Tommy Tiernan, who you've dissected. They capture the attention of a certain.
Gerry,
rural Ireland.
But isn't it the case, Gerry, that the last 3 years have been such an education for us in understanding that what we thought of as intelligence was not that at all. That what was going on. It's very interesting, Gerry. I was friendly for a long time with a guy who used to teach people to speed read, and particularly politicians and all those kind of public kind of people, so that they absorb documents very quickly. If one was thrown in front of them, they'd be able to finish it within a couple of minutes. And I was talking to him one time about different politicians, and I won't name them, but I was sort of saying, well, such and such a guy is a very intelligent guy, I would say, and he'd say, well, hang on. He said, how do you know that? Well, I'd give maybe an example or whatever. And he said, well, he says, you've got to remember, he says, that there's a difference, he says, between intelligence and retention capacity. He says, that individual that you mentioned, he said, he has a photographic memory.
Okay.
So that's not the same as intelligence. And what I think you find, that's one of the syndrome that I think we have to pay attention to in the context of what we thought of us as intellectuals and of intelligence in the public realm. Because what we realize now is that they have a certain kind of technical or clinical expertise in a particular area, but they're not capable of making connections. And they're so overawed by the idea of expertise in their own context and want to be honored and respected for that, that they honor and respect every other discipline of expertise as well. And that's deadly. Because really what you need, and this is very interesting, because, and this is related to what I'm talking about here in general, because when you look at the COVID scam, the people who were most likely to see through it were the working people who didn't go to university, who didn't have all of these disciplines and trainings, because precisely for that reason, that they were able to connect commonsensically across a range of different areas and had no obligation, as they saw it, to be reverential or deferential towards any particular discipline or expertise, and they could therefore come to their own conclusions. Expertise was the undoing of our civilization in the past 3 years. Scientific expertise, medical expertise, and so on. And I think that's something that's very much related to what I'm beginning to see about how I'd like to frame all of this stuff that you're talking about in the context of America's influence and role in what's going on now in Ireland, particularly in the context of mass migration. I just want to basically sketch it out because it's very interesting. It starts, I think, from the position of money. It's about money. One of the things that's happened in the last number of years, maybe the last 10 years particularly, is a kind of extraordinary broadening of the wealth gap. In other words, and so you get, whereas maybe 20 years ago leftists were complaining about the gap between rich and poor, and it was certainly pronounced then, but now it's 10 times worse, and the leftists are silent about it. Because the money, the wealth has converged now at the top to such an extent that it's quite staggering. And the interesting thing is that the wealthiest people in the world want to become wealthier. They want all wealth. And the leftists have nothing to say about this. And that's something we need to come back, because leftism has changed. But the way I would frame this is, I wrote an article about a couple of months ago about a book by a man called Roy Sabag, who's an English philosopher, I guess, and writer. And it was called The Natural Order of Money. And basically what's about was, the relationship between gold, which was long-term the money of mankind, the natural money of mankind, and work and productivity. And he made a sketch of the economy having two parts. Fundamentally, structurally, an economy has two parts. The inner part, which is the productive part, basically, which is farmers, fishermen, foresters, miners, people who produce food, fuel, and the base elements. That's it. That's where the wealth is coming. And then the way that works is then that when they produce enough for their own needs and start to produce a surplus, then you get the spillover, create another economy on the outside, which is the service economy. But the inner economy is bound by a law of the land, a law of the sea, a law of the air, a law of 2 and 2 equals 4, which the farmer and the fisherman have to respect. The farmer has to look after his soil. The fisherman has to respect the water, ensure that it's in good condition and not abuse it, not dump stuff in it, not allow other people to dump stuff in it, etc., etc. So there's an ecological accountability that is essential to the functioning of that productive economy. And Sabag his analysis is that must also apply to the outer economy, to the service economy. The same laws must be obeyed for the whole thing to work in harmony, because then the two parts can work together. And the gold then works because the gold approximates, in some way reflects the work and the effort that it requires. It is scarce. It is very useful. It's a resilient metal. It can it carries its weight through time. It doesn't lose. So it reflects it measures the products, the goods, the vegetables, the animals, whatever, and acts as a reward. But when you have this it allows you also to, in a sense, it carries the sense that what you're doing is valuable, what you're doing is of value, and it replicates that. Now, paper money doesn't do that. Paper money is just a token. It has no value whatsoever. It has no history. It's not part. Like gold comes out of the earth, and it is in that sense like humanity and like the work of humans and so on. That's the idea. Now, this is, I think, the core of it. That's why we have entered an era in which the people in that inner economy, the people at the very top, the wealthiest, who have been in the service economy, the banking sectors, etc., who have been siphoning off out of that, cheating, breaking the law of the land, of the air, and the sea, cheating, siphoning, as I say. They perceive that there's an opportunity now to commandeer the productive economy for themselves and to control it totally through technology and AI. And so they want shot of the farmer, the fisherman, the forester, the miner. They don't need them anymore, right? That's their idea. But they also don't want to actually treat them as being part of the human family in the economic context. They don't want to give them any kind of dividend, because okay, if we had a democratic society genuinely, and this moment was arriving, and we were in this situation that, yeah, we're going to have technology, we're not going to have to work anymore, we won't have to send men down the mines anymore, we'll have machines to do all that. Great, you would say. In a democratic society, that means the men will get a dividend for life and their children from this work that they created. They built the mines, etc., etc. But they don't want that, and we don't have a democratic society. And this is intrinsically part of what happened in March 2020 to ensure we would not have a democratic society. This is all connected, you see. So, like, you begin to see now. This is also related to the fact that in Ireland, as I said, there was a coup about 12 years ago here, in which the American deep state was deeply involved. And what you're talking about, the language and all that's being used, that's all been filtered through from the United States. It's the vocabulary of American democratic, and you have massive PR or so-called agencies here, fixing operating. We know about them, and they're planting all this stuff, and they're putting all this language in the mouths of journaliers, and they're parroting it, and the leftist parties, who are all bought and paid for by the Open Society, Soros, and so on. So all of this is all connected. But fundamentally, what we're looking at here is a war on what I call the able men, and that means able men and women. There's the Greek term, the ancient Greek, the men who, with their muscles, they make and mend the world every day. They build things, they fix things, they clean things, they make, And see, this is fundamentally what's been going on for since 2015, 16. 16 was the year that two things happened. Brexit happened and Trump happened. They're in this context, they're the same thing. Because in both instances, what you had was an awakening. You see, what happened for a long time in America, that a lot of the men, more and more men were becoming obsolete in the American economy. And they were just retreating. They didn't want to work because it was becoming, gender balance and all this stuff, which men don't want to do. They don't want to work. Men don't want to be soldiers and be ordered around by a woman who isn't, like in the American army. The general principle with regard to promotions is that women now have a better chance of promotion than men, because when women are incapable of throwing a grenade far enough not to kill themselves, right? And to make sure that they are kept out of harm's way, they're promoted. And then they're giving orders to the men who can throw grenades far. That's as a general principle that has been applied to the entirety of these kind of operations. And men, more and more in America, have withdrawn. And it's well documented. They're basically gone off. They've become alcoholics, opiate addicts. They sit watching TV, stuff in their faces all day. These men, more and more, were obsolescent, until Donald Trump came along. And Donald Trump was the most unlikely champion of these people. You wouldn't have picked him out of a identity parade to say he's the man. He didn't fit. But people forget something about Donald Trump. Donald Trump is a businessman, right? But what kind of a businessman is he?
He was a builder
A builder. And the stories that I picked up, when you actually go back and look at the record and listen to men who knew Trump in that way, they'll say that Trump would arrive. Yeah, he would arrive in his big car on the building site. But the first place he went was the crane driver or down into the foundations, talking to the men who were putting down the girders and so on.
Mm-hmm.
He was interested in what they were telling him about his business. So he developed a kind of an affinity with people like that. And you can still see that in the way he speaks at those huge rallies.
Well, he has the language of the common man and woman. Like he's able, and he's you know, and he recognizes it's almost like the collapse, the quiet, controlled collapse of masculinity, in a sense, and we can see it like I'm definitely on track with what you're saying there about that. But let me ask you this, just in terms of that permanence, is part of what we're seeing then now, if we see, we're looking from within the Western bubble and we're kind of like refugees in the West ourselves. But if we look out to the BRIC nations, is what they, is it in one sense the producer nations of the world have come to recognize what you're saying? Like we'll take the Brazil.
Yeah.
I think Brazil is one of them. If it's not the number one, it's number two agricultural exporter in the world. And you're talking about Russia, another huge thing. Like the resources of Ukraine, we all know about. But in a sense that the producer nations are saying, well, we're actually the people with the resources both above and below the ground, and I do get a fascination with how Africa is the continent of Africa is dealing with this situation, because strategically it looks like they've almost decided to go the way of the BRICS nation, that whatever the promises were of United States diplomacy, it's actually that whatever you might say it has produced for Western English countries, it's produced zero for them. And in some cases, the intervention of Gates, it's actually promoted the kind of culling of many of these countries, these populations. So,
well, exactly. That's exactly it, Gerry. You see, because that's where the divide is now in the geopolitical context. You can see that it reflects this, because people like Xi and Putin and Bolsonaro, when he was leader of Brazil, saw this very clearly, that wealth, what is real wealth? See, the West has been going for years and years, for 50 years, on the idea that you can create wealth on paper. And that you can create a reputation. And of course, this was all backed up by oil and the petrodollar. But nevertheless, now that's hit the rocks. But even if it hadn't, it was a huge problem, because the debt that the West was generating for itself out of its own activities was growing exponentially. And there was nothing to back it up, and there was nothing to kind of, clear it off with, nothing to pay it off, no possibility of it being cleared off. So it was making a nonsense of the idea of money, of currency. And it was creating all kinds of absurd situations, where there was quantitative easing in order to keep the bubble up. The central banks would generate huge amounts of money, as they did during the COVID scam. But if you look at where this money was going to, it was virtually entirely non-productive. Like so much money went out for example, like the money people were being paid to stay at home, a kind of a set-aside payment. Don't do anything, stay home, watch TV, drink beer. Then there was money being given to corporations, as part of these packages as well. But the corporations weren't functioning. Their businesses were closed down as well. So what did they do with the money? They bought their own stock. And the stock market went through the roof. And it's still up there. But it's coming down. So there's a judgment day for all this stuff. So that's one module that people need to keep in mind, that what we're talking about, what people celebrate with the Americans, with Biden and all this is a complete lie. A massive lie. What Putin and Xi and these guys, and there's a great guy whose name briefly slips my memory, in India, an extraordinary character.
Oh, Modi.
No, he's the Minister of Foreign Affairs. I can't remember his name. He's a wonderful guy.
Yeah.
You should look for him. He's fantastic. Like these guys are really thinking about all this stuff, philosophically and otherwise. Now, you see, there's another point that needs another sort of point on the map that we need to move towards and just point it out. And that's the fate of the Democratic Party of the United States of America. What happened to that party? Well, it abandoned the able man. It abandoned what Hillary Clinton called the deplorables. That's the same thing. And Trump picked them up, okay? But what did it pick up in instead? It picked up a cultural Marxist constituency, which was, a mixture of minorities, migrants, gays, trans, feminists, all these. And it made its support base out of all these people. But one of the things it did was it pushed the idea of mass migration to the beyond anything that had been envisaged before, because it encouraged illegal mass migration. This was never before. I mean, people talk about Trump having clamped down on migrants. Obama, even as recently as that, was doing the same thing as Trump was doing. But of course, the media would never talk about this when it was Obama. But, like I saw recently where Biden, there was a very interesting thing I saw there in the congressional hearings in the American Congress. And what it was those kind, when there's a new appointment of a judge, the judge has to go before Congress and get sort of put through the ringer. And Biden had appointed a whole rake of Black women as judges, as senior judges in all kinds of courts, federal courts. And it was fascinating to watch because there was one particular guy whose name, again, I don't remember. He's a Republican. He was fantastic. He was like he was a scalpel. And he went through each one of them, and then he would find a quote, and they all had said the same thing or something very similar, which was that there should be there was no should be no legal basis for the idea of having to produce ID in order to vote. Think about that. Think about that.
Yeah.
So that the very foundation of our democracy, you can just bend the principle of one man, one vote, one person, one vote. Okay?
Let me just hold you there now on that before you go on, because one of the successes of the Trump presidency or one of the mistakes of the latter end of the Obama presidency was, they were so cocksure that Hillary Clinton was going to win. He left a Supreme Court. They could have got was it Ginsburg? What was her name? Ginsburg.
Yeah, Baden Ginsburg. Yeah.
They could have got her to retire when Obama was in president, but he wanted to leave 2 nominations. He wanted to leave those nominations to the next president, but he also left open like hundreds of federal judge positions. And the first thing that I think one thing they've learned, and it ties into why they've attacked it the way you're describing, is he left over hundreds of federal judge openings at the end of 2016. And one of the good things or bad things, or whatever way you want to look at it, is Trump filled in. That was one of his stump speeches, is I've got 90, I've got 100, I've got things judged. So that's obviously been politicized. The judicial system.
Yeah, that's a very important. It's a kind of a slight diversion, but it's a very important one, right? Because clearly, this is a deeply unsatisfactory way to run a judiciary in the first place. I mean, it should not be possible to decide to analyze, to profile a judge on the basis of a political loyalty, or on the basis of the idea that person was appointed by a particular president. A judge should be trained to be objective, to take his or her own subjectivity out of the question, his or her own color, his or her own nationality, his or her own gender, sex, whatever you call it. These should not be relevant matters for a judge. That is the whole point of a judge, that person is trained in objectivity and neutrality. And you see, that's been lost now in all our countries, in all our so-called democracies, where you're getting people on the bone. It's basically then what it means is that virtually every decision is just a head count.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
5 of them and 3 of us, we've lost. Or vice versa. So that's another aspect of that. But you see, the most sinister aspect of all of this has been the way that the Democratic Party has specialized. Now, I do think that this didn't start with the Democratic Party. The Republicans were in on it as well, which basically were trying to pad out their support base by bringing in more and more migrants.
Yeah.
And that's essentially what they've been doing now since the beginning of 2017, since Trump came into office. They've been basically attacking America. They've been bringing in as many outsiders together, and they're giving them votes. Now, interestingly, Gerry, you're talking just to bring us around in full circle. Sorry, but I want to finish this, because this now is what the Irish government is doing here.
Yeah.
They're proposing that people will come here and they'll be entitled to vote in council elections first. Of course, it's just a stepping stone, and in short, that they will outvote in time the Irish native population.
Well, this is I've been down this. I'm currently down this rabbit hole on the voter registers in Ireland and stuff like that, and but one of the things, and again, similar to the States, where there's going to be 25 or 30 judges added to the district courts this year. Well, and to be fair, we need, like, you know yourself on the district judge, we probably need them. But again, it'll be very interesting to see what that influx of judges, what type of characters going into the district court here. I suppose one of the, I'm probably maybe naive or whatever, but if you analyze Trump's vote in the last election, about 45% of Hispanics voted for him, and so this came as a massive shock to the Democratic Party in terms of the very person they brought in to do what they wanted to do. And this is the problem, again, tying in. So when they went because I totally agree with you, they're literally replacing a working class type of person that they used to vote, because basically maybe it's costing them too much to retain their vote, in a sense, by providing, a good job, pension, their kids can go to college, this kind of thing, with a kind of a low cost version. But what I think you've seen, and I think they learned the hard way here, especially if, we'll say, the Ukrainian cohort organize collectively, because they've all come together, and I think they will. Like, if they think we're if they think we're far right, I think they're in for a rude awakening as to what the political views of some of them people will be.
Yeah. Well, you see, that's one of the interesting things that, as you say, and it wasn't just Asians who voted for Trump. Lots and lots of blacks.
Yeah, he doubled it.
Because they were working people. Like, you see, the black population isn't, by definition, a mendicant population. A lot of black people are very hard workers, and a lot of immigrants are very hard workers. And this is one of the interesting things about migrants to a country. Very often what you find, that the most vehement opponents of particularly illegal immigration into a country are the last wave of migrants who came in legally.
Yeah, and it makes complete sense, in a sense, because I suppose, because you made a good point when we were talking before, on the well, I suppose in this sense, is when people come in and they are, like, genuinely hard workers. If you take the Polish community as a cohort, nothing but hard work. Very reminiscent maybe with the way Irish would have gone to the America. They came here expecting nothing, only to contribute to the country, their jobs, provide for their families. Now, we've never. This is when I'm looking at the Ukrainian experiment, and I think it's a biggest experiment we've ever done in terms of migration. Is we've never before brought in 150,000 people over 2 years and given them everything with, in terms of no expectation, like in terms of they're given our social welfare system, they're given our housing system. It's the carte blanche. And I'm not saying whether we should or shouldn't do it. We've never done it. But my question is, when the taps get turned off, the money taps, as if inevitably might happen over the next couple of years, what happens then?
Well, Gerry, you see, this is very important that we because this brings us back to what we were saying earlier about the money systems. Because you see, people say mistakenly say, that this is our tax money that's paying for these people. Actually, it isn't. It's worse than that. It's much worse than that. This is invented money. It's not real money at all. It's toy town money. It's just money that's created on the screen. And so the outcome of all this will depend on the outcome of the larger economic issues. In other words, if the whole system comes down, this will be the greatest catastrophe in Irish history. That these people have been brought here essentially on false pretenses because the money is false. It's false money and has no basis in reality. It has no economic basis whatsoever. It has nothing to do with the productive resources of the Irish economy or the Irish people or the Irish workers. It's completely fictitious. And that's a real problem. And you see, this is something that people don't get to talk about because economists never say these things. Economists are all bought and paid for by either banks or insurance companies or whatever it is, or by think tanks associated like the ESRI, which is associated part of the Irish government essentially. And so people don't know this. So that's one thing that we have to first of all think about. But there are so many other aspects of this as well, because if we brought in 80,000 Ukrainians last year. If we bring 80,000 more in this year, as they seem to be threatening, that's 160,000. That's 160,000. Now, I know it's slightly different to the general the migratory context because you're taking people out of areas and their whole families moving. But nevertheless, when we actually look at the general pattern, I mean, when you introduce then the element of family reunification, we found that the multiplier in that context, once somebody was accepted into Ireland, once they became a citizen or whatever it was, they were permitted to bring in their family. And the average was 20 people. Now, 160,000 multiplied by 20 is, it's 3.2 million. It's over there.
Well,
you see, so like, and you see the promises which are being issued to these people entail this kind of guarantee. Implicitly, they do.
And that, that is the sense is, and it's almost like one of the things with the Biden visit in the paper is that they're presenting a fantasy about the future that we would probably say is not going to happen. And, you're saying you look at the bigger picture. I would say the bigger picture here is that there's now two world orders. It's not a question of there might be, they're in existence. And by virtue of that duality is that the incomes and what's produced and available to our societies is going to go down. So all these companies that are doing business with, Russia's one example, but that are based in Ireland, American, even pharmaceuticals, whatever they might be, I would view it as their bottom line is going to take a hit over the next 10 years as a result of these two entities. Yeah. And, the fantasy money that we're currently getting to our exchequer, they released figures there last week and they were saying, the first 3 months of the year, they took in even 6 billion more than they were expecting. But I would say that tap is we're almost like it's in a sense where it's 2007, it's March 2007 now. Well, and we're nearly, the merry-go-round's going to stop, whether it's sometime this year, next year, or the year after. But when it does stop this time, we're in big trouble.
Well, yeah, but look at it in this way as well. Let's go back to our concept, the Royce Bag concept of the productive economy and then the service economy. Well, the Irish economy is almost entirely now service. except for a little bit of pharma. And okay, let's include the pharmaceuticals at some level. It's a double-edged sword, but maybe some of the drugs maybe don't actually kill people and actually cure them. Who knows? Stranger things, I suppose. But 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 nevertheless, I mean, most of this stuff is complete bullshit. Like, it's big tech and it's Twitter and all this stuff, Facebook and all this, which is like of no use to anybody, right? Let's be honest about it. This is now our economy and our employment, And by the way, these companies were supposed to come here into Ireland and, create employment. That was the whole thing, wasn't it? Employment Google, 5% of their staff is Irish, 5%. And that pattern, I'm sure, is replicated throughout the whole sector. So, my point is here, like that, while, Russia is intent upon developing its farming industries and its fuel and oil and so on and gas, all these things, and metals and base metals and all of these things, lithium, whatever, they're the premier place in the world now for all of these little things that are essential for computers and cars and all that. We're like, the West has been outsourcing all this stuff for particularly the last 20 years. Trump tried to reverse that to some extent. I mean, he did it with oil and opened up, lots of new opportunities there. But the first thing Biden did was close that down. So you see, one of the things that you see in all this is when you look at what's going on now with the mother wefers and all these, and climate change, everything. Just think about it, like every single thing they're coming up with is an attack on the able man, on the productive economy, the farmer. Look what happened to the Dutch farmers, and they're revolting now about that, and successfully. Everything is directed at carbon and all this nonsense. It's all about closing down that economy. It's presumably to replace it with machines at some point, but after a period of enormous trauma, for unquestionably, that is coming for the world and for the West in particular, because we're not prepared, and nobody is accounting. This is one of the things that I've covered. I've watched this now very carefully. I've listened time and time again to what the WEF is looking for, what it's doing, read Klaus Schwab's books and all that. Nobody in there is accounting for the consequences of them doing what they're doing in the short term. They have some kind of fantasy about sustainable economy, sustainable fuels, all this sort of nonsense. They don't know how it's going to happen. Self-driving cars. It's complete pipe dream. And they're telling us this will be the future within like 15 years. It won't. It won't be the future at all. If this was the future, then there is no future, because it's not capable of sustaining a population.
Well, then there's
America.
Just what your thing, you could make the argument if you look at the narratives, the repeating narrative, the narratives we all look at are, the trans agenda, the climate agenda. We had the COVID agenda. Now we have the war agenda. We should just take them for. And if you take the trans and the climate, it's, you were saying that, about the US population and the voter pattern was an attack on the able man. You could argue that they're now in a position where they have to make whatever able man is out there, and man and woman, is they have to actively disable them. And, agendas like,
yes,
trans and I mean by the ideology, I'm not having a go at anybody that is dysphoric or anything like that, but I mean the ideology is designed. It's almost like a designed ideology to not solve your problem, number one, if you want to focus 99% of your. There was a great book actually called The 1% Doctrine that came out after the war in Iraq, and the concept of it was that after the, and I know there's a lot of 9/11, that's another rabbit hole you could go down, but for the purpose of this, that the whole administrative state in America applied the 1% doctrine, which was 99% of our attention is going to go on something, even if there's only a 1% chance that that might happen. And you would nearly take that to another step today and say, we're going to spend 99% productive intellectual capabilities on our 1% problems, and almost no thought on the major, the major problems that the average man and woman has in their life. So let's spend all our time talking about solving a problem that wasn't a problem. Isn't,
Certainly you would have to think that in the context of Ireland, like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like in 2010, there was no talk about any of this stuff.
Yeah.
Within 2 or 3 years, it was all gay marriage, gay marriage, gay marriage, as if this was the most important thing in the history of the world, you know? And then it moved from there inexorably. They said, well, that's all let's start off. We just want civil unions. We just want to visit each other in hospital. Yeah, blah, blah. Then next, how do you mean we just have civil unions? We need to be married. Okay, let's do that. Now we want a family. Now we want to start a family. And, now it's trans. You see, like this is all, on one hand, it's distraction. On another, it's a fundamentally altering the very notion of what humanity is, and it's gaslighting people to the extent where they are no longer able to think straight because they don't know what's safe to think now, or how you can connect up diverse thoughts. You don't fit together anymore, because you think you have a certain outlook on reality, and suddenly there's a grenade thrown into the middle of it. Suddenly, you spend 30 years talking about child abuse and protecting children and so on and so on, and then you have to let men into women's toilets, where girls are going.
Yeah, and behave in all circumstances like this, that these are normal conversations. It's that there's, to raise an eyebrow is like to suggest there's something deeply wrong with you.
Well, that's a very interesting thing that I picked up from when I was writing my book. Like, when you actually go back and look at that, you see, because like when these people start talking about this, it's like this has always been true. We have always been supporting trans rights. When you look back, you find that actually the day before yesterday, they weren't supporting this at all. Not only if they were talking about it, they were talking against it. I mean, this was something I discovered with, say, the Irish Times when I went back to its editorials in relation to gay marriage. Like up to like a very short time before, they had been taking the same position essentially as the Catholic Church on somewhat different grounds, but nevertheless the same ultimate position. But so they give you the impression that they were fearlessly fighting for this for about 150 years. And it was quite staggering to see this, like, and this is the same here, as and people pick it up. People like who never mentioned this in their lives before, suddenly, if they pick up from you that you're not entirely enthusiastic about this whole thing, well, what have you got against trans people?
Yeah,
and nothing really, but
and the real question I have about this, because I've written a lot about the trans ideology, and I've talked to people about it. I sincerely believe these people don't care about trans people.
No,
they're using our gay people, our black people, or any of the identities that they've chosen to champion. I think genuinely that and I think that's another thing that Trump kind of picked up, and it was reflected in the voting patterns in 2016 when, or 20 was like his African American vote went. It either it went from 5 or 6% to 12%.
Yeah,
as we always said with the Asian Americans and the Hispanic vote, is that I think greater and greater numbers of these identity groups are figuring out, these NGOs that are supposedly championing our rights and our rights and some alleged abuses are not actually acting in our interests. So if you look on the trans people are being supported at the expense of lesbians, are children.
Yeah,
and this that's a fair trade-off in some way.
Well, you see that Yeah, well, you see, this is at the heart of the whole thing is the ideological incoherence of Western politics now, because it's all of these contradictions. It's feminists against trans. I mean, the feminists started off the logic of that there's no such thing as men and women are the same, right? Now they're sort of sorry they might have for maybe saying that, like so there's all kinds of other incoherences as well. Like, for example, the same governments that on Monday are pushing abortion and banning people making protests about outside abortion clinics. On Tuesday, they're telling us, oh my goodness, now because of abortion, well, they don't say that part, but implicitly, we're going to have to bring in lots more immigrants because there won't be enough people here in 50 years to keep the economy, to keep the pension pot going. Who'd have thought? That kind of thing. It's completely incoherent. But always the effect of it is to destroy the lives of working people in their own economy, in their own country, in their own nation. You see, when you look back, Gerry, like at the divides, when you actually look at the countries we know best, say America and Britain, let's just talk about those two. They had these divides. The Democratic Party was the working class party. It's hard to imagine now, but it was. When Kennedy was.
Absolutely.
When the Kennedy was, that's what it was. Right? And at that point, the Republican Party was the big business party, and they were the boss's party, as it were. Right? The same happened. The same was true in the UK. The Labour Party was the party of the working class. And the Labour and the Tories were the big business party. In Ireland, it was somewhat more subtle, as it were. I mean, there's to some extent you can say that Fine Gael were certainly in urban areas the party of business, but that wasn't true either, because Fianna Fáil was in a different way the party of business. But above all, Fianna Fáil was the party of the small farmer and the working man. Like, much more so than Labour was. Labour never really, except for occasional bursts, which was mainly in modern times with a little bit of this kind of, yuppie liberal vote. But Fianna Fáil were really the working man's party. Now they have completely turned Turk and are basically adopting the same line as the Democratic Party of the United States. And Fine Gael are, in a sense, they are the Democratic Party of they're holding that position now. So there's no alternative, and all the leftist parties are all purchased by the Open Society Foundation, essentially. So there is actually no opposition apart from maybe 2 or 3 mavericks within the whole thing, independents and people like that, and they occasionally get to make speeches and get abused by the Cancorda or by the Cathaoirleach of the Shannon or whatever it is, and get shut up. And you see the camera pans around the chamber and it's completely empty. Or if there's anybody there, they're smirking away, at this far right nonsense type of thing, And like this is like such a degradation of politics, of democracy, that the very people who pay for the whole shebang are being disrespected in this fundamental, this industrial way. And that's only at the abstract level of politics, as it were. Then when you go onto the streets and say the same people pleading to be consulted about what happens to their villages, like, or you have, busloads of men from who knows where, who have come here without documents, without any checks, without any vetting. They're bussed in, and immediately on day one, their numbers exceed the indigenous population of the village. And the villagers are told, suck it up. We don't want to hear your racist joke in your mouth.
Yeah, and there's a number of things brought back there, because you did it. One of the very interesting ways you looked at the Tommy Tiernan scenario was when you went to the concert, and you had this description of the crowd were very happy for him not to talk about the elephant in the room, which was the COVID era.
Yeah.
That there was this almost silent agreement that we know something's not right, but we're also okay for you not to talk about it. And I feel a bit of that with the migration stuff that's going on now as well. It's like people know there's something not right, but they're, again, maybe Maybe it's a factor of the AI processes we've already gone through, because we've spoken before about attention spans and our abilities to consume and process information, and
Hmm.
and that's already played into maybe to a degree. But there's this, there's this thing, I think, with the migration is similar to that, is that people haven't had the comfort to talk about it at all in a way
Well,
we would expect them to do.
well, you see, that was a deliberate strategy from the very beginning. You weren't allowed to question it. And in the early days, you see, it was all like a kind of a, you know, salami tactic, a little slice at a time. And, it wasn't like first of all, the EU wave, and that came in, it was much bigger than anybody said it was going to be. But people said, oh, well, okay, well, whatever. I do think actually, by the way, and this is a by the way, that whereas that initial wave from Eastern Europe had many positive aspects, and I said so at the time.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, I think it had a negative aspect in the sense that it allowed Irish people to create a kind of apartheid of their own, whereby certain jobs were no longer theirs. They didn't have to do the menial things anymore. Now that'll change again, but I think that was a very regrettable aspect of that. That it said, well, the people working in cafes and bars are going to be from Poland and Lithuania and so on, and we don't do that. That's not a good thing for society, and it's certainly not a good thing for young people who need those rites of passage when they're leaving school, when they're in college, to get to work and get the corners knocked off them in bars and in shops and so on, stacking shelves or whatever it is, filling petrol in the day back in my time, that kind of thing.
And it's certainly not good for creating environments for able-bodied men, the abled men and women who want to spend their time in, productive, but maybe, physically manual type of work,
Yes.
and we'd associate that maybe more with men, but it's expanded from that to stuff like where you see, an NCT centres in Galway here can't get any mechanics to work in it. So they go out to the Philippines, and so we've got a big problem. Here's how we solve it: bring in a load of people from the Philippines, and then they treat them back like they kind of more or less put them into, whatever kind of cramped accommodation, right. And they don't treat them well.
These are just main aspects. I mean, this is something. This is some of the hidden, the hidden behind the compassion thing, that isn't good, but you were talking about the silence. I mean, that, I remember like way back in the early noughties, starting to write about this, in a certain kind of just quizzical way, say, okay, well, we're bringing all these people in, and that's fine. They're Europeans. We voted for that. We voted at Maastricht for that, and so on. But there's lots of other people coming in, and what's the story there, and where are they coming from? Are they coming via Europe, and what's that? How does that work? And then I would say, well, I came up with a formula whereby I would say, okay, well, because everybody would say, oh, if you raise it, you're a racist, right? Well, I say, okay, but how does this work? Because we're a small country. It's not that long since Brian Lenihan Sr. was telling us that we couldn't all expect to live on one small island. Literally, those were his exact words. And now suddenly we're expected to take in hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of other outsiders. And without any change. I mean, do you remember, Gerry? By the way, back in 2002, there was a launch of what they called this spatial something. It was this spatial awareness or spatial plan, and then there was hubs and gateways and all this stuff, and nobody had a clue what it was all about. And you know what it was all about, Gerry? Nothing, because 10 years later they had a review of it and nothing ever happened, and they thought the document was a bit obscure, and so they started again then. And really what it was about, we discovered in the end, was what we're now finding out. They were trying to recreate a country that would basically absorb as many outsiders as they could actually push into it. But back then I used to say to people, including my colleagues, journalists, so-called, okay, well, you say that we have to take all these people. We have a moral responsibility, blah blah, and that's fine. Okay, how many? Like we were at the time less than 4 million people. So what proportion should we? And I said, well, we can't really figure on it. Well, no, let's try. Can we? Let's try. I say, okay. So do you want us to take in 1 million? And they would say, oh, no, don't be ridiculous. Oh, so that's too many, you think? Okay, it's too many. Fine. So 1 million on top of 4 million, I'd agree. It's too many. Okay. So now let's go down to the other end. Let's try to. What about a dozen? Oh, don't be ridiculous. Now you're being facetious. Okay, that's not enough, you think. Okay. Well, somewhere between a dozen and 1 million. So could we? So let's move around. So let's say I say then, let's not bother wasting our time. But let's say that you think you might arrive at a figure of say 300,025, right? That was the number we have to take. Fair enough. Okay, maybe I'd agree with that. I don't know. I'd have to do some sums myself, but let's see. Okay, so that takes maybe 18 months, and then on a particular Saturday night, the 300,025th person arrives off the plane, go into passport control, dum, 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 in they go. That's it. We've met our quota. Okay. Now, on Monday morning at 10:30, another chap gets off the plane and arrives and wants in as well. And the guard said, no, sorry, no, sorry, we're full. Is that still racist? No answer. Of course, the answer is it is. From their point of view, everything is racist. Whatever they say is racist is racist. There's no reason to it. It's just they are pushing an ideology. See, these people have no consideration for anything. They don't care about Ireland. They hate Ireland, actually.
No, I like that's if I wanted to ask Paul, would say somebody like Paul Murphy.
Better turn the light on, Gerry. Sorry.
Yeah, go for it.
That's a bit better.
Yeah, if in some bananas way had to ask Paul Murphy, will say the people for profit one question, it would be, do you love Ireland?
Yeah,
and I think he'd probably shite himself, because everything about our political class seems to be getting us to be embarrassed about everything about our history, everything about ourselves, and that in some way we're this kind of person that needs to be fixed. And the way we're going to fix it is we're going to take you over here and we're going to incorporate as many people from as many different nationalities around you, and we're going to create something brand new over here. So that's why, like, I think with stuff like they get very uncomfortable with stuff on culture, I think, and that because they're taking our symbols. If you take Paddy's Day, they've hollowed out the symbol of Paddy's Day now and they've just turned it into whatever you want yourself kind of thing. It's like here you can use it.
Paddy's Pride Day, you know.
Yeah. So, and whatever you want to turn that into yourself, here you can just do it.
You see, you can see as well the hand of the American influencers and the PR companies, you know, and the Teneos and all these kind of guys in the background, you know, doing this, because you see it breaking through sometimes, you know, because that there is a kind of a way it washes down to a particular grid, you know, from that down to the NGOs who are the people who are, you know, managing all this stuff on the ground and, you know, coaching the migrants when they come about how they're to react and how they're to speak to the Irish and regard the Irish as racist from day one is the general principle, it seems. And, you know, if an Irish person asks you where you're from, you become outraged and tell them, I'm from here. You know, you say, no, you're not. No, oh yes, I am Irish. Yes, you know, this sort of stuff. But you know, there was a very interesting episode of it recently, and I've talked about this recently as well in another podcast. But it's worth mentioning that famous episode where Philip Dwyer was up in Kilbride. trying checking out on the army centre there, whatever it is, the barracks there, which was, it turned out, full of migrants, and it wasn't clear whether they were soldiering or were they just relaxing or what. And Philip was kind of asking some questions of one of them at the gate, and the next thing, 3 Irish soldiers come running down the hill, at full trot, and one of them attacked Philip and knocked his phone out of his hand and so on, and started abusing him. Well, one of the things he said was really interesting, because Philip said something to him about where are these people from, or how long have they been here, I think was the key. And then I said, well, how long have you been here? You see, you can see a whole history behind that, a whole kind of volumes of coaching, the logic of the ideology of it. Any Irish person is not entitled to claim to be Irish. You're not entitled to claim any lineage here. You only came here yourself the day before yesterday off the boat. Sure, you only came over with the Vikings, for God's sake. That kind of stuff. Your people, well, I say very proudly to people, I've been here for 1,200 years. I came with the Normans, who became more Irish than the Irish at the time, right? Okay. And I'm willing for people to come here at any time and become more Irish than I am if they want. I'd be delighted. But not when they come here under false pretenses, not when they come against the wishes or even without any consultation with the native people or the people that they will have to live among. That is an invasion. And if you want to talk like that, the Norman invasion was an invasion.
Yeah.
So let's be honest about it. Is that what you're doing? Is that what it is? Because that's what it looks like.
But you can even tie that into the Biden visit, because he ties this Irishness. He wraps this Irishness around himself. It's like a mask it's like a cloak to try and fill a void of his own corruption and collapse of spirit.
Yes.
And
yes.
It's
but,
that.
Yes, but I don't think it's Biden, you see. I understand what you're saying.
All right, okay.
Yeah, but nevertheless, hang on. I'm not dismissing what you say, because you see, the people who are being Biden are acutely aware of all this stuff, and they know that they have to actually show it. So this just brings me to my theory about the black and tan thing. Okay. I don't think that was a rehearsed thing. It was a rehearsed slip of the tongue.
Ah, okay.
In my opinion, because you see, the way it was delivered, it was too hammy. It was something that he had rehearsed. You could see the way it was being played out, that it wasn't just, he had to stop and say it, you see. So that my theory is this is what they're doing, because you see, these guys are working at a much more elevated basis than we would normally think of in this kind of context. Of course, this is unprecedented. Let's be honest. Like this is a movie. You know what I mean? Like this thing couldn't have happened before movies. Nobody would have possibly have dreamt of this. But movies have trained us into this way of presenting stories. And so now you're in one and you don't think it's strange, because you've seen the movie already. And the president who isn't the president, and and he's a fake president. Like we've seen him being there and all these sort of stuff, in different ways. But this was a way of creating authenticity for the idea that Joe Biden is a little bit gaga, but not totally gaga. You see?
Yeah.
And you see, all the collateral damage was basically smoothed over by the journal liars, potentially. There was they could have gone to town on that if they wanted to. If their instructions were to go to town, then that's what they would have done, because that's what they're paid for. But it wasn't real, I don't believe.
Well, that's an interesting. I need to think about that now, because that is an interest. I need to go back and watch it, to be honest with you, because I like that.
There's a hesitation where he gets to where he's stuttering. Like, it's not like something that just slipped out. It's something that he has been waiting to say.
Yes.
All blacks is much easier to say than black and tans. Like,
yes.
Okay, maybe an American president wouldn't know about the All Blacks. I don't know, or wouldn't be used to it.
Well, that would have been all that would have been all prepared in advance. Do you know what I mean? Like somebody that
I think if you watch it, the way he delivers it, there's something
I
contrived.
need to I need to go and watch that. But one of the things I wanted to ask you, and it kind of ties back to this love affair this country has with the Democratic Party, going back obviously to John F.K. But one of the imponderables for me as a kid growing up was that here we were in Ireland, even back in the 80s and 90s, glorifying a left party when we would never in a million years have voted one in Ireland in our
Yeah,
history, but that it, but that vehicle of JFK and the Democratic ties, and then with Clinton, like Clinton was really, I don't think we give enough. I don't think he gets enough credit's the wrong word in terms of how much of a performer he was in a misdirector of our attention, because that love affair between Clinton and Ireland, which began when he came over for the the peace process and all that, it began a system where Ireland seemed to actively it's like develop this special relationship with presidents. Like this is just from my time, but I don't
yeah.
remember to the degree with Reagan, or we'll say even the ones previous, but that we've made that special effort. Like when you go to Obama, a bit less with Bush, but like Obama, and now with Biden, and again with Trump, like with Trump, there was an effort made there when he visited here, but they kind of wanted to reject him a little bit. But we've had this thing where we make an extra special effort to increase our relationship with the Democratic president's nominations.
Well, that's right. Well, I mean, of course, that those connections go way back before the Kennedys. Tammany Hall and all that. I mean, they were deep connections. Like the Democratic Party essentially was an Irish party in America. It grew out of that route fundamentally. But the Kennedys were interesting because, you see, it wasn't really a left-wing party when Kennedy was there. Kennedy something strange happened with the Kennedys. I mean, Kennedy, like you would wonder if John F. Kennedy had not been assassinated, what his legacy would have been, what people would remember about him. I don't think he'd be remembered as a remarkable president at all. But that's not in any way to disparage him, because I do think, I mean, I said recently at a talk I was given, like that the Kennedy brothers, Jack and Bobby, were actually Irish heroes. They're part of the kind of the pantheon of Irish patriots, really, in a strange way. Because they inspired Irish people in a way that our own leaders at the time didn't necessarily, or had ceased to do, or were ceasing to do. And so, but I think the interesting character, far more interesting character than Jack, was Bobby, because Bobby really grew up when Jack was killed. I mean, that really radicalized Bobby in an amazing way. And he's an extraordinary figure. And I mean, to me, I was a young guy growing up, like he was a real hero of mine. And I was absolutely heartbroken when he died, when he was killed. And like a lot of my generation were, in a way that really Jack didn't, because we were probably just that little bit too young to really get what Jack was. And of course, then behind that, there's the great shadow of Joe, which is a terrible, a Biden-esque, figure in the background, But that's kind of, in fairness, I think, even though, the Kennedy brothers, were womanizers and all that, like, all that was, not even on the charge sheet, and maybe it shouldn't be. That's their own business, So, but you see, after that, then. This continued, and it's very interesting then to see that the warping of the Democratic Party that occurred after probably started with Johnson, who was a very strange individual in many respects. I mean, he was a very crude individual. I mean, people think that Trump is crude, like Johnson was. Like, oh my God, like he used to have meetings, sitting on the toilet. In his office, like he would leave the door of the toilet open and have the meeting sitting on the phone inside. And I won't go into any further detail, Gerry, because it is a family show. So like, but now here we're coming to an extraordinary moment now, Gerry. Really extraordinary moment. But you see, do you understand what's happening? Look who's now throwing his hat in the ring for the Democratic nomination for 2024. Robert F. Kennedy
Kennedy,
Jr.
yeah. I'm just getting to that now.
Oh, like, wow.
Yeah.
Now, Paddy, sit up and listen. Pay attention now.
You
Because
see,
here's
the
the
real.
world's leading anti-vaxxer. Yeah.
Yeah. So the reaction to that, and that was the point. That's the road I wanted to travel. Was here we are, a country that's fell in love with a Democratic Party largely because of a family, and here we have a member of that family who announces, and not a word, not as much as a murmur, really, about it in the Irish press, and I was thinking to myself, I said, this is very interesting because not only is he running, he's running for the Democratic Party nomination, which
Yes.
I find interesting as well, because I think regardless of what happens there, it's an interesting candidacy because from my point of view, he's potential trouble for both candidates.
Oh, well, Jerry. Yeah, well, Jerry, I mean, maybe I'm slightly out of the loop in a little way. I mean, but it seems to me that the Kennedys are still American royalty. All of them, regardless.
Yeah.
He is the son of Bobby Kennedy. This is an amazing thing. It's an amazing thing. He's an extraordinary person. Like, he is an extraordinary intelligence, extraordinary courage. Really, like, he's a one-man sort of, hurricane. And I don't know. I won't be running down to Paddy Powers in the next few days on this, but I would watch that space very carefully because he has a chance. If he can break out of the starting gate, there'll be no stopping him.
I think it's a Ross Perot election. If you go back to Clinton's first election, and the reason Clinton really got elected the first time was Ross Perot was in that election and took a big swank. Like he took a big vote. He took a big chunk of the pie in that election, the 92 election. But the way I look at this here is he hasn't, the Democratic Party, whatever happens there, I would assume he's going to run as an independent, regardless of whether he gets the nomination. Democratic Party. Maybe I'm wrong about that, because I would say they'll be gunning for him. Like they'll be gunning for him.
Oh, well, yeah. But it's going to be pretty hard for him to gun from, because, I mean, they have tried to paint him as this kind of lunatic, but it's not working. He's extraordinarily stable.
No, I don't think it's working, you see.
Yeah, and it's going to be particularly difficult for Ireland now, because you see, not alone is there the DNC, Democratic Party issue, there's also the big pharma issue, which is, our bread and butter, as it were. He is their greatest enemy in the world, RFK. Like, he is absolutely merciless in attacking them.
And that narrative is getting better and better. That's the horse that's running towards him, getting faster and faster.
100%. Yeah, that's it.
So
he's coming into a winning streak. He's hitting the runway, with perfect timing, because it's all coming out now. And increasingly, it's coming out. The work of people like Ed Dowd, like in America, his book, is just sensational. Like, none of this gets through to the Irish people, of course, but it's happening. And eventually, Ireland will have to face the fact they can't all the time, be tweeting sentimental pieties about Joe Biden, because Joe Biden may end up in jail, or whoever is representing him or being him at that particular moment, until they discover that it's actually not the man they thought they had. So yeah, I think this is a very interesting moment. Like, and in a way, you see, Gerry, this is like the deplorables. This comes full circle, because the Kennedy story, is incomplete. But this could be the denouement of that story, which we have lived through in our lives. I mean, you're a lot younger than me, so I lived through it all. I didn't even know, to be honest, who JFK was until the day he died. I barely heard of him. And then I saw my parents and my neighbors weeping that day. That was my first inkling of what this man was. And I was about 7 or something like that. It's quite an extraordinary story, the Kennedy story. But Bobby Jr. is a very different kind of person in some respects. Obviously, like he's a maverick. He's not a mainstream game player. He doesn't kiss ass. Of course, Jack and Bobby were their own men in different ways, but they were part of the establishment. He's not. But the moment could be right for precisely that kind of man. Not that there's any other man like him. There's no such thing as a kind of man that he is a unique person. And that, I think, is his strongest card. This is the moment. Because the greatest crime in history is about to be found out. And he's the man who's been calling it there in America most vociferously from the beginning.
Oh, like I think it's going to be a fascinating election cycle because he doesn't have the stain of, like, whatever you might, Trump and Biden. He doesn't have the stain of, he doesn't have the smell of anything.
No.
Personally corrupt or personally,
No. Well, I think actually, ironically and strangely and so on, he could easily beat Trump.
Yeah.
Because there would be no reason to vote for Trump if Kennedy was running. Yeah, but with all due respect to Trump and his achievement and what he represents and the great, enormous, great work he did in awakening that 100 million people who had been basically on the scrap heap, economically and culturally and otherwise, there wouldn't be any necessity for Trump anymore. In fact, if I were Trump, I would bow graciously to Bobby Kennedy and say, after you.
Yeah, I would see, because my personal thing, like the two things I'd have on that, it would be that one is because they successfully did what they did the last time, they'll successfully do it again to Trump in terms of the corruption of that election.
Well, there's yeah, Gerry, I don't know, because the Americans awakened to that now. Like everybody, everybody's watching that now. They're watching for the signs, and of course, but they won't be able to get away with the postal voting. Of course, they could. I see they're trying to launch a bird flu scam now, so that could be their scam for that. Who knows? But I can't see the generality of the public in America, whatever about Ireland, buying that one again.
Well, I'd say I think it was, I would say somebody asked Angela Merkel 15 years ago, she says, can democracy, at a time when we all thought we were living in a democracy, but said to Angela Merkel, can democracy survive if it doesn't survive in the United States, in the world? And her answer was immediately, absolutely not. It can't. No, it cannot. And I think I think they're one election cycle away from a complete breakdown where that country disintegrates into two pieces.
There's all kinds of stuff happen. Yeah,
they can afford. Like, I do agree with you in the sense, I don't think they can afford another election like the last one and expect to survive, because all trust in all institutions is practically evaporated.
Well, I think the trust in the media above all is beginning to disintegrate now at an enormous rate. I mean, that amazing interview that Elon Musk gave. I mean, I've had my questions about Musk. But I mean, you have to get up and give it up for that. That was just sensational, I thought that question. He said, your man said to him, yeah, this isn't an interview about the BBC. And he says, oh, you thought it wasn't?
But the pivot, yeah, it perfectly encapsulated this laziness, or what I was saying to
Yeah,
you is this.
but it's like the kind of thing we couldn't have dreamt of at that level in the past. Like, this is miraculous. So, I can't figure out what's going on with Musk, because he's such a kind of a multifaceted character. I find him immensely attractive, in the sense that I find him very charismatic and likable in terms of his personality. But I'm suspicious, obviously, about these, the surveillance stuff and
I think we're all like
head chipping stuff and all that, of course. But who knows? Who knows? He's certainly throwing grenades into all the right places.
Well, he's on stuff like that. That makes it so 10,000 times easier to reach the average person when something like that obvious happens in an interview. And it also, it embarrasses the whole. It embarrasses the whole the traditional media. As an industry, because that's we look at the BBC, traditionally look at the BBC. That's supposed to be one of the best that's in the industry. That interviewer is supposed to be. He's not like writing in the Irish Examiner, or he's or some regional newspaper. He's what you're trying. Here's what your mainstream media 21-year-old journalist is trying to attain. That's it. And when you see how mediocre that, not even mediocre, how absolutely ruinous that type of education or ideology that gets to that level, it makes I can't see how it survives.
The most striking or startling aspect of that interview, when you sit right back and think about it, was that this journalist working for the BBC wasn't able to issue a single word in defense of his employer. Like, he had nothing to say to Musk. Like, he wasn't able to say, no, what you're saying isn't true, because he knew it was true. Mm-hmm. They had covered up the vaccine injuries and deaths. They had done all this. They were being paid by the government. They were being given orders by the government. They are a public company. They are, a state entity, as he said earlier. Of course they are. They're being paid out by a license fee. Yeah. That people are under pain of imprisonment must pay. Come on, what can be more statist than that? So, but the point is, I suppose, what I'm making about that is that things are beginning to give now in all kinds of unexpected ways. I just think that the ordinary person, the average person who hasn't yet got the news about what really happened, would have been intrigued by some of the questions Trump or Musk was asking, at least maybe impelled to check out, well, what did he actually mean by that? Is that possibly true? So I think, in all of these things, we are kind of tend to be pessimistic for all very good reasons, because of the monolithic nature of the corruption in the media. But the ice is cracking, and you see, once the ice starts to melt, it's not going to, it's not going to go the other way again. And so I think it's the coming. I do think they will try to cover up to steal the election again. They have to. I mean, look, there you can see actually in the front they put up in Ballina and in Ireland generally for that person, whoever it was. You can see how desperate and determined they are to maintain the facade.
It's like
they don't have another option.
I think you're right. It's like they're trying to wish that and that we really believe in it. And I suppose the last question, we tailor this up to the last question is there going to be any repercussions for Ireland, on our own level, in terms of, we look at the wider world, and we've touched on it. Some of the decisions this government have made in terms of, the way we're treating and talking diplomatically about Russia, we'll say, and even now we're starting with China, and our fundamental defense of United States policy. Are we creating enemies we don't know about here in the world that comes next?
Oh, we are, and you know, we're boxing way above our weight here in lots of ways. Like, we don't need to be doing this. There's no reason
Mm,
I can think that the objective reason. You know, we could easily simply just produce the neutrality card, and that would be the end of it, more or less.
hmm
But you know, and also there's the fact that, you know, in the world that we may be about to enter into, who knows what way it's going to fall like. But I mean, the Russia is a very important economic operator in the world, you know, in terms of food and fuel and so on. We're very foolish to be cutting off our nose in that way, particularly when they're allied with China and India and all these other places. So, you know, I think we've made some very foolish choices. It's like as if we are, you know, the newspapers print lies, and then our leaders who have inspired the lies read the lies and say, and then believe them. You
hmm
know, there's that kind of toxic circularity about it. Whereas in fact, everybody knows that they're lies, but there's a kind of insistence on believing them. And that's the impression you got from that whole visit thing, because like it's a farce at every level. For anybody that knows what's really going on in Ukraine and in America and so on. But I think that so we have. But you see, the thing I would say here, Gerry, is that something that struck me very recently. You know, when we talk about this COVID episode and all the stuff
hmm
that's been happening since, we're talking that it's the end of Western civilization and so on. And yes, it is. But that that kind of observation implies that the end of Western civilization is up ahead. I suspect we have to start thinking about the fact that the end of Western civilization is already past. That
hmm
if Western civilization had not ended, Leo
hmm
Varadkar would not be Taoiseach.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
You know, like,
hmm
or Michael D. Higgins would not be president.
hmm
We just wouldn't. Like, if we were a civilized country still, these people would. Well, probably Michael D. for his service, and if he had remained the kind of person he was,
hmm
you know, which is kind of this kind of woolly, lefty, wishy-washy, you know, type of guy, you know, we could have tolerated that. But now that he's become the obnoxious person he's become, threatening people, menacing people, making these appalling, disgusting speeches, you know, and snide attacks on young people and so on. And leaving aside, not to mention the apartheid law, which he introduced and then claimed afterwards that he hadn't a chance to read it. You know, come on. But I don't think that, you know, I think we have to look back and say, well, what happened way back? Like, and really, I think you have to look at what happened once we handed over the reins of our country to the EU back in 1973 on the 1st of January. That was the writing on the wall. That was the beginning of a process that probably took another 20, 30 years to really take effect, full effect. But what happened in that period was that the kind of sober, sensible people, the intelligent, educated in the proper sense, stable people that you might have liked, you know, looked at them and with their grey suits and their, you know, dark ties. You know, you'd have said, well, he's not going to be much of a laugh, but he's going to do a good job.
hmm
You know, those people didn't go into politics anymore, and you got all
No,
the gobshites going in.
no, we were able to create the machinery for an elite class in Brussels, where and a place for them to meet and store, gather, increase power, and then it becomes when the goal then of the power center is to send through a steady supply of ever increasing idiots coming
Yeah,
to represent the people.
yeah.
Um, and
I know.
you know,
No, it's beyond anything. Like,
until it collapses, until that collapses, like so in some certain sense.
yeah,
But yeah,
that's right. And but then we don't know what's going to how, you know, when it
well,
collapses. What
yeah,
then?
well,
You
what then?
know,
Like, I suppose the thing the what then is you want, you kind of would be hoping that you haven't, your behavior hasn't meant that all options are open in terms of who you can be friends with into the future. It's like, you know, that
well,
kind
that's
of a
right.
way.
That's 100% important, Gerry. That's exactly right, and that's very important. That you know, the future of Ireland is not dictated by the prejudices of Micheál Martin and Leo Varadkar.
Yeah,
they're
Yeah.
irrelevant. They're irrelevant,
Yeah.
probably more. Hopefully, they're
Yeah.
irrelevant to the future of Ireland. So that there will be
Yeah.
different people who will emerge. We
Yeah.
don't. I keep saying this, and people don't like me saying it because they think that there should be some form of you know. Uh, I don't know, revolutionary guard. I don't. I think with the people who I keep saying that the people who are likely to be the great leaders of Ireland probably aren't known about yet in the
No,
future.
and I 100%, I 100% agree with you. Because I 100% agree with you. Most people and most good leaders, if you think of a leader, one of the first things they recognize is the corruption of power has on them personally. It's not a theoretical thing. They don't want it. So the
Mm,
first the first I don't want to be part of that because I'm afraid of how powerful it is.
yeah. Well, that's
But
right.
like, but I would be. I'm really hopeful myself, like, but I'd be hopeful what comes is much more, whatever comes out of it. Like, it's like when you say, when did an empire end? You can only say when an empire ended, maybe 400 years later, when you look back and you say, oh, that was the pivotal point there and it could be 15 years ago. Like, I think you're right. I think it probably is the transition as well on its way. Like,
Yeah, yeah. I think once we let go, I see it's the great tragedy of Ireland was that we lost the revolutionary generation of leaders who were executed in 1916, and that set us on a completely erroneous path, and it culminated then in the failures of the 40s, 50s, and then the false new beginning that began in the late 60s, 70s with essentially a model of economy that wasn't an Irish economy at all. And that was the undo. We then became a central part of this kind of false economy of the world with the fiat monies and the fractional reserve banking and all this stuff, which has been so destructive and has essentially created that kind of parasitical economy in which these people who don't produce anything call all the shots. And ultimately, the ultimate kind of incarnation of that is the World Economic Forum, the most useless people on the planet, the most brainless people on the planet, who are now telling us what our future will be like. They never got a vote between them in their lives.
And this, yeah, we could spend another fucking 2 hours talking about that.
Yeah.
Look, we're going to wind this up. Before we do, I want to just say to everybody, and I'll put it in at the beginning as well, please go and support John's Substack, johnwaters.substack.com. And one thing, and we should have a separate conversation on this, but John, for me, has created the chronicles of the pandemic in the written word. And I do feel that in time, John's Substack is going to be of historical importance for people in the future who are trying to understand, when we get past all of this, in whatever long time it takes, that when people are going back to look for a chronicle of the pandemic era, it's your Substack, 16,000 words a week on the whole thing. So I would, anyone that isn't already, and I know we have a good crossover readership, but really do go in. The links will be in the bottom of the of this video, and I'll have a piece about it.
Thanks very much for that, Gerry. Thank you for that. I mean, I do think that it's certainly part of what I'm trying to do, is to leave a map behind, because at the very worst scenario, if we don't if we don't succeed, and if we fall into a period of slavery, for example, or communism, or whatever it might be, that hopefully, and I intend to actually get all this stuff into books in some form, get it written on hard copies and get it out there, because I would die happier if I had one copy of everything in hard copy left behind me, rather than if it was on multiple platforms on the internet. But I do think that's what I'm trying to do, is partly to create a map for people. People don't understand. Say, your article is very long. Well, I said, well, that's the way they come out, and that's what I feel I need to do, because I do think that there's so many aspects of this that people in the future will need to be able to piece together to say, how could this have happened? Who was like, what was going on in the background, and trying to pick out certain elements of the past, like, for example, the recent thing about natural law, like what happened to our fundamental rights. I mean, I've done 2 parts of this, and I have another part to write next week. This is very important. People, they don't, you see, young people particularly, because they've not been educated in civic awareness, don't understand why the Constitution is so important, why these things matter. I don't care about the Constitution. I say to them, well, do you ever go do you like rock and roll? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Do you ever go to a Coldplay concert? Yeah. Did you ever think you might be able to go to a Coldplay concert and decide that you don't believe in electricity? That electricity isn't important. Like, it's central. You mightn't see it. You don't hear it. The electricity doesn't make a noise, but that's what's making the whole thing happen. And similarly, the Constitution gives life to all of our confidence, our sense of movement, our sense of action, our sense of togetherness, our relationships, our friendships. All these things are vitally important. The Constitution is a very important foundation to all these, in a very strange way. And that's what I'm trying to do in many ways. Of course, I'm also trying to help people to understand now, so that they will be able to fight for their country, maybe. But
yeah,
if I lose that, at least the other plan B will still be there.
Yeah, no, and definitely, the importance of it can't be understated. And anyway, but so listen, John, thanks a million. I'm just going to end the recording now, and thanks to everybody. If you can hit like, subscribe, and share with your friends. Thanks
very much, everybody.